Sometimes all it takes is a quiet moment and a warm drink to remember what really matters. So go ahead, take a sip, and let me tell you a story. One that's honest, raw, and maybe a little like your own. Olivia Bennet hadn't expected a battle when she walked into her parents' house that evening. It was supposed to be a quick visit. A simple family dinner. Another obligatory evening spent indulging the illusion of warmth that had long since faded. Instead, the moment she stepped inside, the air felt charged, heavy with something unsaid. Her father, Richard Bennet, didn't even wait for her to take off her coat before launching into an attack. "How could you be so selfish, Olivia?" he thundered, his face reeking with fury. He stood near the fireplace, pacing like a caged animal. "The property taxes on the lake house are due next week, and you're refusing to pay them. Do you have any idea what this family sacrifices for you?" She blinked, stunned. It wasn't a request. It was an expectation. As if she were a misbehaving child who needed to be scolded back into obedience. What?" she managed, still trying to process how a casual dinner had turned into a full-fledged interrogation. "Dad, I've been covering those taxes for 5 years. 5 years. On top of Mom's medical bills, Nathan's car payments, and those family vacations that somehow always came out of my account. And now you're telling me I'm selfish." Her mother, Diane, sat stiffly on the couch, staring down at her neatly folded hands, as if pretending not to hear would make the confrontation disappear. Olivia knew that look. It meant Diane would say nothing, do nothing, just like always. Richard scoffed. "Your brother is trying to build something for himself, Olivia. Unlike you, he doesn't have a stable career yet. He needs help." Nathan. Of course. It was about Nathan. It always was. Olivia clenched her fists, swallowing the familiar resentment rising in her throat. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she noticed something. An envelope peeking out from beneath a magazine on the coffee table. Its thick, official-looking edges caught the light, the bold lettering across the top sending a strange pulse of unease through her. "Trust Fund, Nathan Bennet." A sharp chill ran through her. Trust Fund? She reached for it, her hands moving before her brain fully processed the implications. "Olivia, that's private," Richard snapped, lunging forward. But it was too late. Her fingers gripped the papers, eyes scanning the dense legal language. The more she read, the harder it became to breathe. For $100,000. A fully funded trust, set up years ago, with additional scheduled contributions. For $100,000. Her father had told her for years that money was tight, that they couldn't afford to help with her college tuition, forcing her to work 2 jobs to stay afloat, that there was no extra cash when she needed help with rent in her early 20s, that asking for a loan to launch her investment career was out of the question. And yet, here it was. Proof that the money had always been there. Just not for her. "When were you going to tell me about this?" she whispered, her voice eerily calm despite the storm raging inside her. Richard exhaled sharply. "Olivia, put that down." "No," she met his gaze, her chest rising and falling in sharp bursts. "You've been lying to me for years. You told me we didn't have the money. But you were saving hundreds of thousands of dollars for Nathan while I was draining my own accounts to cover this family's expenses." Richard's expression hardened. "Nathan needs a foundation, Olivia. He's not as independent as you. You've always been able to handle things yourself." There it was. The truth in its ugliest form. She had spent her whole life thinking that if she just worked hard enough, if she just contributed more, she would finally be seen as an equal part of this family. But that had never been the case. Nathan was the son, the investment, the future. She was just the safety net. Her grip tightened on the papers, her heart pounding like a war drum. She wasn't a daughter. She was a bank. The silence in the room stretched, thick and suffocating. As Olivia stood, gripping the trust fund papers, the betrayal sat heavy in her chest. But beneath the shock, something else began to take shape. Recognition. This wasn't a one-time slight, a mere oversight. It was a pattern, a design, a deliberate decision that had existed for years. Memories began surfacing, stark in their clarity now that she could see them for what they truly were. She had always been the afterthought. The unspoken truth had been there all along, hiding behind her parents' reassurances, buried under excuses of financial struggles. The signs had been in front of her for years, yet she had chosen not to see them, because acknowledging them meant accepting a truth too painful to bear. Her mind drifted back to her teenage years. She was 16, working weekends and after-school shifts at a local coffee shop. Every hour accounted for. Every tip carefully tucked away into a savings envelope in her dresser. She had been saving for a car. A necessity really, since her school was too far to walk and the unreliable city buses didn't align with her schedule. Then came Nathan's 16th birthday. The driveway had been filled with balloons, and a brand new Ford Mustang sat gleaming under the sun. The sight had nearly knocked the breath out of her. She had assumed, foolishly, that maybe her parents had come into some unexpected money. That maybe, just maybe, if they could afford this for Nathan, they could help her with a used car. Nothing fancy, just something functional. But when she had mustered the courage to ask, her father had only sighed, shaking his head. Liv, you know money is tight. If you want a car, you'll have to buy it yourself. So she had. 2 years later, after hundreds of shifts and long nights balancing work and school, she had finally scraped together enough for a used Honda Civic with over 100,000 miles on it. She had driven that thing until the doors practically rattled off their hinges. Nathan, meanwhile, had gone through 3 different cars in the same time frame, each one newer, shinier than the last. That was the first real crack in the illusion. But she had explained it away, convinced herself that maybe financial circumstances had shifted. Maybe their parents really had been struggling at the time. But then came college, and the cracks turned into gaping holes. Nathan had attended one of the top private universities in the country. Tuition paid in full. Housing covered. Even a generous monthly allowance deposited into his account to help him focus on his studies. Olivia? She had attended a state school, cobbling together scholarships, grants, and loans. Still, it hadn't been enough. So she had worked 2 jobs. Sometimes 3. 30 hours a week on top of a full course load. Surviving on caffeine and power naps in the library. There were nights she could barely keep her eyes open in class. Moments when exhaustion made her physically sick. The stress had been overwhelming. But she had endured, pushing forward because she hadn't had a choice. And when she had finally swallowed her pride and asked her parents for help, not a handout, just a small loan to cover rent for 1 semester, her father had sighed in that familiar, patronizing way. "We just can't afford that, Olivia. You're doing great on your own. You'll figure it out." And she had. Because she always had to. Still, she had believed it. Believed them. Believed that her struggles were the result of unfortunate timing. That money had been genuinely tight. Now, standing in the middle of her parents' living room, holding irrefutable proof that the money had always been there, she felt something inside her snap. It wasn't just about the trust fund. It was about a lifetime of being told she was strong enough to go without, while Nathan was given everything without lifting a finger. She thought of the time she had needed just a few thousand to invest in her first trading account, back when she was getting her start in the market. The one thing she had ever asked for. An investment, not a gift. Her father had dismissed the idea outright, saying it was too risky. But now she understood. The money was never too tight. The risk was never the problem. The problem was her. Nathan had been the priority. The investment. Olivia had been the safety net. The fallback plan. She wasn't meant to succeed too much. Not in a way that would make her independent enough to walk away completely. She was supposed to be strong enough to carry the weight, but not strong enough to leave them behind. But she wasn't their safety net anymore. As she stood there, staring at her father, her mother, at the people who had raised her yet never truly valued her, Olivia felt the last traces of guilt burn away. This was never about her being selfish. This was about control. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't going to let them have it anymore. If you loved this story, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Your support inspires us to bring you more heartwarming stories almost every day. Thank you for being part of our community. See you in the next one. Olivia stood in the living room, the weight of everything crashing down on her, yet her expression remained eerily calm. Richard Bennett was still speaking, his voice filled with indignation, but she barely heard him now. His words were nothing more than a dull roar in the background. After everything we've done for you, Olivia, this is how you repay us? By abandoning your family when we need you the most. Her mother, Diane, still wouldn't look at her, her hands folded in her lap, fingers gripping the hem of her blouse, as if bracing for a storm she wasn't willing to stop. And Nathan? Nathan had the audacity to look irritated, as if this was an inconvenience to him. Nothing more than a minor roadblock in the life of privilege he had been handed. Olivia didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. There was no point. Instead, she reached forward, picked up the property tax bill from the table, and silently slipped it into her handbag. Richard exhaled in relief, mistaking the action for compliance. He thought he had one. But Olivia wasn't taking the bill to pay it. No. She was taking it as a final reminder of the chains she was about to break. She turned without another word and walked out the front door, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. The cold night air hit her as she stepped onto the porch, but it didn't feel as biting as it had earlier. In fact, she felt lighter. For the first time in her life, she wasn't carrying the weight of their expectations on her shoulders. By the time Olivia got home, the numbness had given way to something sharper, a resolve she had never felt before. She tossed her coat onto the couch, her hands trembling slightly as she pulled out her laptop. The screen glowed in the dimly lit apartment, casting an eerie light across her desk as she opened a financial spreadsheet she had kept meticulously for years but never thought she'd need to confront. Her fingers moved quickly over the keyboard, sorting through bank statements, transactions, and wire transfers. She had always been diligent about tracking her finances. Her career as a trader demanded it, but now she was looking at these numbers through a different lens. 6 years. 6 years of bailing out a family who had never once considered bailing her out. She started adding the figures. Property taxes for the lake house, $8,900 annually, 6 years straight. That alone was $53,400 of her hard-earned money. Nathan's car payments. He had cried about struggling with his budget, so Olivia had stepped in, $650 a month for 4 years. Another $31,200. Medical bills for her mother. The insurance hadn't covered a knee surgery 2 years ago. Olivia had written a check for $12,600 without hesitation. Family vacations. Each time it had been under the guise of "you make more than us, honey. It's just easier if you cover it." She had never added up the totals before, but now she did. $38,000 over 6 years. The final sum hit her like a punch to the gut. $135,200. $135,000. All while her father had been stashing away $400,000 for Nathan's future. Olivia leaned back in her chair, staring at the screen. It wasn't just the number. It was what it represented. It was proof. Proof that she had been nothing more than a resource to them. Proof that they had never thought she needed help because, in their eyes, she had only ever existed to provide it. A cold clarity settled over Olivia as she opened her banking apps, her heartbeat slowing, steadying. First, she revoked her access as an authorized payer on all family accounts. No more automatic withdrawals for property taxes. No more surprise deductions labeled family emergency that somehow always fell on her shoulders. Second, she canceled the automatic payments for Nathan's car. Let him handle his own finances for once in his life. Third, she opened a new investment fund. One that would serve only her. She labeled it My Freedom. And then, with one last decisive motion, she transferred $135,200 from her brokerage account into it. It wasn't about getting the money back. It was about reclaiming what was hers. She barely had time to close her laptop before the call started. Nathan was the first. The moment his car payment bounced, his outrage came in full force. "What the hell, Olivia? My car payment was declined. Are you trying to ruin my credit?" She didn't respond. Then came the text from her father. "I just checked the tax payment. It's missing. Fix this immediately, Olivia. Do not ignore me. We are counting on you." Not a thank you for 6 years of sacrifice. Not even an acknowledgement of what she had done for them. Just another demand. Her mother's voicemail was next, her voice trembling. "Sweetheart, your father is beside himself. We don't understand what's gotten into you. The property tax is overdue, and Nathan can't make his car payment. Please, we need to talk about this." They weren't asking why she had done it. They weren't asking if she was okay. They weren't even acknowledging that she had given them over $135,000 without ever asking for a dime in return. They just wanted her to keep giving. Her father expected obedience. Her mother hoped for submission. And Nathan? He had never even considered the possibility that she would say no. But Olivia wasn't their personal bank anymore. She silenced her phone and leaned back in her chair. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel guilty. For the first time in her life, she felt free. The silence Olivia had imposed on her family did not last long. By the next morning, her phone was vibrating nonstop. Missed calls, voicemails, texts, each one more hostile than the last. Nathan, unsurprisingly, was the first to lash out. Nathan, what the hell, Olivia? Are you trying to ruin this family? She read the message without emotion. Ruin the family. That was rich, coming from the person who had effortlessly benefited from her sacrifices for years, never questioning where the money came from, only expecting it to keep flowing. Minutes later, another one came in. Nathan, Dad says you're acting out because you're upset about the trust fund. That's childish, Liv. You make more than all of us combined. Just be reasonable. Reasonable. The irony nearly made her laugh. Had it been reasonable for her parents to lie to her for years? Was it reasonable for them to guilt her into financing their lives while they funneled money into her brother's future? She set her phone down, ignoring the texts. Then came the voicemails from Richard Bennett. His tone had shifted from irritation to cold command. Olivia, answer your damn phone. We need to talk about this nonsense before you make things worse for everyone. A few hours later, another one. Do not think you can walk away from your responsibilities. We are a family. You owe us, Olivia. Everything you have today is because of us. Of them. Olivia's chest tightened as fury simmered beneath the surface. The absurdity of this statement nearly sent her over the edge. Everything she had built herself. No trust fund. No financial cushion. No handouts. She had earned every single cent through long nights of studying market trends, taking risks no one believed in, and surviving on nothing but sheer grit. Her father's words weren't a plea. They were a command. A warning that, in his mind, she belonged to them. That no matter how much she had already given, it was never going to be enough. She deleted the voicemail. She had no intention of playing their game. For 2 days, Olivia refused to engage. She didn't respond to texts, ignored the phone calls, and went about her business as if her family didn't exist. But then the retaliation escalated. On the morning of the 3rd day, Olivia opened her inbox and immediately froze. An unfamiliar email sat in her inbox, marked urgent. Loan application approved. Her pulse spiked as she clicked it open. It was from a financial institution she had never dealt with before. The email confirmed the successful approval of a mortgage loan under her name. A 6-figure amount had been secured, one she had never applied for. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the details. The loan was tied to her name, her credit, her personal financial information. And then she saw the signature at the bottom of the loan agreement. Her name. But she hadn't signed it. A sickening realization settled in her stomach. They forged her signature. The betrayal had officially crossed from manipulation to criminal fraud. Olivia bolted upright from her chair, her breath coming in sharp bursts. This wasn't just emotional exploitation anymore. This was identity theft. Her parents had not just used her for financial support. They had stolen from her. It took Olivia less than an hour to find the right lawyer. Daniel Mercer, a financial fraud attorney with a reputation for handling cases like this, picked up on the second ring. Olivia Bennett, he asked after she quickly introduced herself. Yes, she said, gripping her phone tightly. I think my family just committed financial fraud against me. I need help. She emailed over the documents immediately. Within 2 hours, she was sitting across from Daniel in his downtown office, watching as he flipped through the papers, his brow furrowing deeper with every passing minute. This isn't just a case of misuse, he finally said, looking up at her. They forged your signature, Olivia. That's felony-level financial fraud. If we prove this, they could face serious legal consequences. Olivia swallowed. She had known it was bad, but hearing it put in such stark terms solidified the gravity of what had been done to her. Daniel continued, his tone measured but firm. The next step is obtaining an official verification of the forgery. I can bring in a forensic document examiner to compare your actual signatures against the one used here. Once we have that, we can move forward with legal action. Legal action. She had never imagined it would come to this. For years, she had excused their behavior. She had rationalized the favoritism, swallowed down the disappointment, convinced herself that it was just the way things were. But now they had crossed a line they could never walk back from. Olivia clenched her jaw and met Daniel's gaze. "What are my options?" she asked. "If you want to pursue charges, we can take this to law enforcement. Or, if you'd rather avoid that route, we can file a formal complaint through the financial institution and demand immediate cancellation of the loan on the grounds of forgery. If they refuse, we can escalate." He hesitated for a beat before adding, "Either way, Olivia, I'd advise you to prepare for a war. They won't take this lightly." She exhaled slowly. A war. That was exactly what this had turned into. That night, Olivia sat alone in her apartment, staring at the city's skyline through her window. Her phone buzzed again. Another missed call from her father. She didn't answer. Instead, she picked it up, opened her contacts, and, with calm finality, blocked their numbers. For the first time in her life, she was done playing their game. Her family had spent years treating her like a financial resource. A silent ATM with no right to say no. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated her. Olivia wasn't a victim. She was a trader. A strategist. A woman who thrived in the art of calculated risks. And she had just decided to bet on herself. The Bennett family home had never felt more like a battlefield. Olivia pulled into the driveway with slow, deliberate movements, her fingers tightening around the steering wheel as she took in the familiar sight of the grand house. The house she had been financially supporting for years. Tonight, however, she wasn't here to appease, to listen, or to compromise. She was here to end this. The moment she stepped inside, she immediately felt the weight of their collective hostility. The living room was packed. A deliberate setup. Her father, Richard, had gathered nearly the entire extended family. A clear attempt to shame her into submission with an audience. Aunts, uncles, cousins, all seated, all waiting. Some looked confused, others uncomfortable. But most had the same expression Olivia had seen her entire life. The expectation that she would fold. Nathan sat near their mother, arms crossed, eyes darting toward her with a nervous energy. He knew. He had to know that the truth was about to come out. Richard stood at the head of the room, his presence commanding, his posture rigid. As soon as she entered, he wasted no time. "I'm glad you finally decided to show up, Olivia," he said, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable undercurrent of authority. "We need to discuss the damage you've caused to this family. Your selfishness is affecting more than just me, your mother, and Nathan. It's affecting everyone here." She almost laughed at his audacity. He was attempting to rewrite reality, to make her the villain for simply refusing to be exploited any longer. Olivia didn't sit. She didn't remove her coat. Instead, she walked to the center of the room and placed her briefcase onto the coffee table. "I'm not here to discuss anything," she said smoothly, her voice carrying just enough edge to silence the murmurs in the room. "I'm here to show you exactly what's been happening behind the scenes of this so-called family." Richard's jaw tightened. "Olivia, this is not the time for dramatics." "Oh, but it is," she countered, unlatching the briefcase and pulling out a thick stack of documents. Then, with one calculated motion, she tossed them onto the table. The pages spread across the polished wood. Legal documents, bank statements, transaction histories, proof of everything. The room went deathly quiet. "What is this?" Richard demanded, though Olivia could see the flicker of uncertainty in his expression. She straightened her posture, taking in the moment before responding. "This," she said, tapping the top document, "is a full itemized breakdown of the financial support I've provided to this family over the last 6 years. Property taxes, Nathan's car payments, Mom's medical bills, family vacations, all totaling over $135,000. Money I gave willingly, believing we were struggling. But it turns out that wasn't true, was it? She pulled out the second document and held it up. This, she continued, her voice now sharp as a blade, is a mortgage loan that was taken out in my name without my consent. The signature? A forgery. And I had it analyzed by a forensic document examiner. Guess whose handwriting it is? Richard's face drained of color. The room erupted into hushed whispers. A few of the relatives leaned in to get a better look at the documents, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock. Olivia gave one final blow. She held up the trust fund document, the one that had started everything, and finally she said, turning to the room, making sure her voice carried, "This is a legal trust fund, set up exclusively for Nathan, $400,000. Created while I was being told there wasn't enough to help with my education, my rent, my investments. While I was being drained for every expense this family had." Nathan's face went pale. He didn't dare meet her gaze. And then she dropped the final bombshell. This isn't just favoritism. This isn't just unfair treatment. She turned her eyes to Richard and Diane, her voice turning deadly quiet. This is financial fraud, and I will not let it stand. The reaction was immediate. Nathan looked horrified, as if he had finally grasped the severity of what had been done. His mouth opened, then closed, but he couldn't seem to find the words. Diane let out a soft, broken gasp, finally raising her head for the first time that evening. "Olivia, sweetheart, let's just talk about this." "Talk?" Olivia cut in, tilting her head slightly. "Like how we talked about my student loans. Or the times I asked for help and you both lied to my face." "No, Mom. We're way past talking." Richard's composure finally cracked. "You're being ridiculous," he snapped. "This is still a family matter, and you wouldn't dare take legal action against your own parents." Olivia held his gaze. "Try me." A chilling silence fell over the room. And then, for the first time in Olivia's life, she saw something flicker behind Richard's eyes. It wasn't anger. It wasn't condescension. It was fear. Fear of exposure. Fear of losing control. And, deep down beneath all that, perhaps a sliver of respect. The aunts and uncles, once silent spectators, began to murmur among themselves. "She's right. This isn't normal. You did what? I can't believe this. Taking money from your own daughter. Richard, how could you?" Olivia saw the shift happening in real time. The carefully curated image of the Bennett family was cracking, splintering apart right in front of her father's eyes. Uncle James, the eldest of Richard's siblings, stood up abruptly. "If Olivia is telling the truth, and these documents say she is, then this is disgusting. You owe her an apology, Richard. And I mean a real one." Another aunt shook her head in disbelief. "I had no idea it was this bad. We all thought Olivia was just being dramatic. But Richard, this is fraud. What were you thinking?" Richard's face twisted in rage. "You don't understand the sacrifices I've made for this family." "No, Dad," Olivia said, her voice steady. "I understand them perfectly. Because I was the one making them." Nathan looked like he wanted to disappear. For once, the golden child had nothing to say. Olivia exhaled slowly, gathering the remaining documents into her briefcase. "Here's what's going to happen," she said. "The fraudulent mortgage? It gets canceled immediately. The money taken from me? I expect it back. And moving forward, I am no longer financially responsible for this family." She turned to leave, then, as an afterthought, she glanced at Nathan. "And if you're as smart as you pretend to be, little brother, you'll figure out how to stand on your own 2 feet for once." With that, Olivia walked out, leaving behind the ruins of the empire her father had built on lies. The Bennett family meeting had ended in chaos, shattered illusions, and irreparable fractures. Yet, as Olivia walked away from the house that had once been her burden, she felt lighter than she had in years. Her father's parting words had been nothing short of venomous. "You'll regret this, Olivia. You'll regret betraying your own family." She hadn't responded. There was nothing left to say. But she knew the truth. She hadn't betrayed them. They had betrayed her. For years, she had poured herself into this family, financially and emotionally, giving without question, without hesitation. And in return, they had lied, manipulated, and used her until she was nothing more than an ATM in their eyes. That ended now. The fallout from the confrontation had been swift and brutal. Nathan, for all his privilege and entitlement, had finally come to terms with what had really been happening. Seeing the numbers in black and white, over $135,000 of Olivia's money spent while his own fortune grew untouched, had forced him to acknowledge the truth. For the first time in his life, he turned against their parents. 1 week later, Olivia received an official legal notice in the mail. She tore the envelope open with steady hands, her heart pounding not with fear but with anticipation. The letter inside contained everything she had been fighting for. The fraudulent mortgage loan in her name? Immediately revoked. Her parents had been forced to return the funds. They had no choice but to undo what they had done. The looming property tax bill that they had attempted to trap her with? Paid in full. And not by her. Nathan had used a portion of his precious trust fund to cover it. A symbolic repayment, perhaps. Or a small step toward actual accountability. And, most importantly, she was free. The letter confirmed she was no longer financially tied to the Bennett family in any way. No more obligations. No more guilt. No more expectations. For the first time in her life, she belonged to no one but herself. 1 month later, Olivia stood on the balcony of her new oceanfront apartment, watching the waves crash against the shore. The air smelled like salt and freedom, the sun warming her skin as she sipped her morning coffee. She had left the past behind, both physically and emotionally. Her old life had been dictated by family obligations, by guilt, by an unspoken demand to give without limits. But now she was in control. She had redirected every dollar she once spent on them into her own future, her investments, her career, her personal goals. The money she had once funneled into a family who never appreciated her was now being used to build a life she truly wanted. And for the first time, she wasn't looking back. As the wind swept through her hair, Olivia exhaled deeply, finally unburdened. No one would ever take advantage of her again. Because she had learned one lesson that she would never forget. No one has the right to turn kindness into obligation. Olivia's journey is a powerful lesson on self-worth, financial independence, and breaking free from toxic family expectations. In a world where familial duty is often weaponized, this story serves as a stark reminder that kindness should never be mistaken for obligation. Olivia spent years sacrificing for a family that saw her not as an equal, but as a financial resource. Like many in today's society, she was conditioned to believe that love meant giving without limits, even when it came at her own expense. Her decision to walk away wasn't just about reclaiming her finances. It was about reclaiming her autonomy, dignity, and future. This story resonates deeply with anyone who has ever felt trapped by guilt-driven expectations, financial manipulation, or the burden of always being the responsible one. It challenges the outdated notion that family ties excuse exploitation and highlights the importance of setting boundaries, valuing oneself, and recognizing when it's time to say no. Olivia's story is ultimately a message of empowerment. You don't owe anyone your success, your money, or your peace. You have the right to choose your own future on your own terms.